Chapter 44 to 45. Harry spent the following Sunday paused for what could have been months or years. After getting Laura out, he finally decided to take the time to check out his gains from Sinister's mind, Sinister's hard drives, and what he stole from the compounds he and Logan raided. Sinister was unsurprisingly a real piece of work that reminded Harry a bit of Voldemort in his single-mindedness. There was nothing in the data he acquired that showed what Mr. Sinister was afraid of, but it was obvious from what Harry did get from his mind that the man feared something, and he was trying to create a mutant powerful enough to fight against whatever it was he feared. Harry felt this was similar to Voldemort, who feared death and tried to become the strongest magical to avoid it. Voldemort, however, was blind to using other means to achieve his goals, and Mr. Sinister seemed to only focus on making himself or another mutant strong enough to fight whatever he was scared of, but he didn't look much into other means of fighting it. His data showed decades and in some cases centuries of research and testing on mutants and their powers, and looking over some of the memories Harry was able to copy, he figured out what the man wanted from Jean. Mr. Sinister apparently had sponsored several orphanages, and when Scott's parents died, the young Summers had lived in one. Sinister's tests seemed to show that a child between Scott and Jean would be stronger than any mutant he was capable of creating. Harry could easily see the man was right, but he doubted if Sinister knew why. After a number of tests, Harry found that the type of energy Scott was capable of connecting to and emitting was basically bird seed for the Phoenix Force. It could literally nourish the psionic entity, and psychics in general would gravitate towards Scott. Though they would look at Scott like a plate of delicious food, not as boyfriend material. If they couldn't tell the difference between hunger and love, they might convince themselves they had feelings for him. Sinister apparently met Scott in disguise years ago and imprinted into the boy's mind a need to be with Jean that would go into effect once he saw her. He seemed to plant something similar into Jean, but that quickly faded, and there didn't seem to be a point to putting it back. Sinister had means of monitoring Salem and seemed to know that Jean and Scott were growing further apart. Jean's kidnapping was to implant a need to be with Scott. Sinister was going to arrange it so that Scott would find and rescue her at a place of the man's choosing. He didn't count on Harry, of course. No matter what means he used to gain information, he would only get the lies Harry told everyone else and nothing else. Then there was the stuff he got from Canada. The weapons project, Weapon X, founded and funded by a man named John Sublime, it was a way to use mutants to fight and kill mutants. The project shared similarities to Sinister's work in that both were ways to strengthen mutants, but they had different end goals and different means to achieve them. Sinister wanted mutants to give birth to stronger mutants. Sublime just wanted to use mutants to kill mutants. The files he read almost made him regret not killing everyone in both facilities. They had allowed their fear to justify actions that would have made Death Eaters squeamish. He wouldn't go back even if he knew, though. The sites appeared to be partially funded by a few governments, but were not completely under government oversight, and John Sublime was a civilian. If Harry had killed anyone, they would be declared threats by those not a part of the program, and the response to the raids would be completely different. However, if a weapons program was defeated by two sets of two people, three of which were unknown, and they got in and out without killing anyone, that would look terrible on paper for whoever was in charge. None of the researchers Harry wiped would be able to continue their work, meaning the program would have to hire more, which would cost money. Would a program that got hooped so easily be allocated additional funds, though? Most would think it was a waste of money and not even care who took it out, since the perpetrators didn't kill anyone. Even if they did restart it, Harry would see if he could get the goblins to track where the money was coming from and mess with them appropriately. Probably the most interesting part of comparing the data from Sinister and the data from the weapons program was that the holes in one appeared to be filled in the other. Thanks to this, Harry now understood a lot more about mutants than he had before. From what he could tell, the X gene was somewhat of a blank space in a human's DNA. It was a gene that did absolutely nothing because it contained no information that could be used. In times of great stress or under specific circumstances, though, the X gene could change from something that gave no information to something that did include information. A mutant was someone whose X gene filled in on its own, however there were means of manually writing information onto the X gene. Harry had discovered several programs known as super soldier programs, and sometimes they worked on a person, sometimes they would not. Harry now understood that the people it worked on had an inactive X gene, and the process that turned them into an enhanced had manually overwritten their X gene to grant them those abilities. That also meant that no one without an unawakened X gene could successfully become an enhanced. Though difficult, it was somewhat possible to enhance a mutant, and sometimes an enhanced would become a mutant as well, though the end result was impossible to guess. Using what Harry already knew combined with everything he learned, Harry figured he could probably create a gene therapy that would grant anyone without an X gene an X gene. He could even think of a few survivable ways to permanently remove an X gene, even an awakened one. Once he had that information, he promptly locked it away into the deepest, darkest depths of his mind. That was not information the world was ready for, and Harry doubted if it would ever be ready for it. The only problem was that if someone else got access to Sinister's data and Project Weapon's data and was clever enough, they could figure it out too. Hell, Harry wouldn't be surprised if someone figured it out without their data. Although Harry wouldn't use it for the same purposes as Sinister and the Canadians, he could use it to help Dr. McCoy with his own research. Over the course of the following week, most of the staff and students decided to give Harry some blood to make blood gems. Harry had not told anyone he used them to find Logan's daughter, but a number of the staff and even some students guessed it. 11-year-old Laura Kinney herself was easily accepted into the institute, and Xavier and Warren took care of all the paperwork. Dr. Sarah Kinney was actually offered a position as Dr. McCoy's research assistant, which paid well and gave the woman a chance to stay with her daughter and work in her field, which happened to be genetics, same as Dr. McCoy. Something interesting was that Harry was unable to make blood gems for 3 of the residents of Xavier's institute. Kurt's blood seemed to be mostly human, but it was outside of the range required for the blood magic to work, meaning his blood could not be used. Something similar happened with Warren's blood. Harry said he appeared to have an atavism, which caused his blood to have similar effects to a distant, less than human ancestor. Something Harry didn't share was that Warren's blood actually burned Kurt's. It made him wonder about the angel and demon pair. The third failure was the most surprising. Harry could not use any blood magic with Scott's blood. Kurt and Warren had blood that would be perhaps what a child of a Homo sapien and a Homo neanderthalensis would appear. The descendant of a human and an offshoot of humans. Scott though had at least a grandparent who wasn't born on the planet Earth. This probably explained why Sinister felt his genes were so special. Though his DNA appeared completely human, Harry's magic could tell it was not, and why it was not in ways even the great Nathaniel Essex never could. Harry discussed his findings with Dr. McCoy and Dr. Kinney, and they found the absence of certain markers which showed Harry was correct. After some debating, the 3 decided to inform Scott of his interesting heritage, though no one else. Harry also used the chance to obliviate Scott of the memories he had of Jean before he met her. That wouldn't affect his existing memories, but it would remove the influence Sinister implanted in him. Harry wondered if he should feel bad about that and decided to set him up on a date at some point. Scott took it relatively well, though he did ask what it meant. Harry just told him that whatever species was in him was highly compatible with humans, which manifested in the power of his awakened X gene, and that his children would have an easy time awakening their X gene as well. Things returned mostly to normal after that, though with the help of his time turner Harry appeared to have more free time than normal, which caused some people to try to take advantage of him. Several students would claim that they were sick at the times when it was their turn to make food and ask Harry to take their shift because he was regarded as the best cook in the institute. On the 3rd time this happened, Harry decided to take steps. Evan had not only shameless begged Harry to step in when it was his turn to make breakfast, he also asked him not to tell his aunt. Harry smiled and agreed. Harry made stacks and stacks of pancakes, which were something with a low enough level of difficulty that Evan could take credit for without suspicion, and Evan accepted everyone's thanks with a warm heart. That was until everyone started shooting flames out of their asses. Harry had added a special potion, something he got from Fred and George Weasley's joke shop, to the batter mix. The flames were bright blue and cold to the touch. They did not burn and would safely go through the pants of the victim without harming the fabric. For a whole day, every student and most of the faculty would randomly fart blue flames at various times. Logan's phys ed class that day was track and field, which many students would recall as the most memorable class of the year. So many but flames. Safe to say, the truth came out and Harry was not asked to take over another shift again. Kurt did, however, ask to be taken on as an apprentice. It was a few weeks later, near Thanksgiving, that 2 things came up. In the morning when Harry was in his workshop, Goose came in and was followed by a small purple dragon. This was Lockheed, the alien dragon Kitty made friends with during their space adventures. Harry asked, "What's up, Goose?" Harry always took at least an hour or so to spend time with Goose. Sometimes Goose would also visit the study group's table and Harry would just pet her while he tutored the others. Harry had seen Goose and Lockheed hang out a few times but didn't ask about it. Goose conveyed, "He needs assistance with something, I recommended you." Harry turned down to the blue dragon and asked, "Alright, how can I help?" Lockheed seemed to be hissing in various tones while moving his jaw, so Harry asked Goose, "Does he have problems speaking English? Should I use telepathy?" Goose conveyed back, "No. His race speaks with each other telepathically, though a hive mind connection, but they refuse to communicate the same way to other life forms. He can speak English, it just feels uncomfortable. Harry asked, they don't like telepathy with members of other races? Goose continued, not exactly. Their telepathy is empathy-based. He just doesn't want to talk through his emotions with a guy. Harry burst out laughing at that. It explained how Lockheed was speaking with Goose since Goose was female. He wondered if Lockheed spoke with Kitty. Harry considered a few things and asked using Parseltongue, can you understand this language? Lockheed seemed taken aback at that and answered in fluent Parseltongue, I did not expect to hear this language from a human. Goose's description of you did not do you justice. Harry asked, have you met Goose before? Come to think of it, is Goose her real name? Lockheed answered, I've run into the Flerken a number of times over the last century or so, though I did not expect to see her on Earth. Her name cannot be constructed using sounds you are familiar with, so Goose is acceptable. The same goes for my own name. My parents certainly did not call me Lockheed, but I will not be sharing my true name with you this day. Harry did not hide his surprise at any part of that statement. It proved that Goose was not from Earth and also showed that Lockheed was likely dragonkin, for lesser dragons did not have true names. Dragonkin however were not weak, so his appearance, which was only a size larger than Goose's, did not fit a standard dragonkin. Harry decided to directly ask, are you dragonkin? Lockheed nodded, yes, though very different from most. My species is renowned for its spirit and mind, not our bodies. For example, though you have hidden it well, I can feel a dragon's aura on you. Another would not notice it, but I can. That answered most of his questions, so he continued, so how can I help you then? Lockheed jumped up on the workbench and said, Goose tells me you are an excellent crafter and can learn foreign technology without great difficulty. There is something I'd like you to build for me. I do not have the materials nor skill to build it myself, though I do know how it works, and in exchange for teaching you my people's technology, I ask you to fulfill my request. Ping. New quest, phone home. Lockheed ran away from his flock and wishes to contact them again to inform those he cares for that he is well. Plus bonus, create untraceable connection. Harry said, I will not build anything that could end up causing great harm to this planet of people I care about. Other than that, there should not be a problem. Lockheed nodded and seemed to respect that. He said, I was considered something of a hero among my own people in the Brood Wars. I was given many honors, but those honors took away my freedom. I was made into a status symbol and was going to be forced into marriage with another, celebrity I suppose you could say. I was not interested in her, but she wanted to possess me and I was practically sold to her. Had the X-Men not barged into the war, I would have been married off the following day. So I ran. Harry listened without judgment to Lockheed's story. Not all heroes had a happy ending, and Harry was at least happy Lockheed was able to escape the fate of a trophy husband. Lockheed continued, I left without warning or message to others. Many perhaps think I have died, but there are those I care for who I wish to inform I am doing well. I wish to ask you to build a communicator that I can use to contact my parents. Why me? I mean, I know I'm good, but Forge could probably build a communicator using spare parts from the ship. Goose interrupted, apparently having followed the whole conversation in Parseltongue. His race communicates, interacts with one another, and even travels through the astral plane. He needs someone who can build within the astral plane. Lockheed, apparently having heard Goose, said, she is correct. I need someone capable of crafting astral tech. Harry smiled, I'm game. Harry feels the space cave in behind him and turns to find, not Kurt, but Harry Potter. The doppelganger Harry says, Jean is going to go critical in 7 minutes. Use Protocol Supreme and take Rogue and Wanda. Clearance code, Wolverine Heartstorm. I'll take over with Goose and Lockheed. The original Harry sighs and apparates to Wanda and Rogue's closet and knocks on the door. Harry has been keeping several monitoring charms in Jean's room so that when Jean has a nightmare capable of disturbing the house, the charm creates a timestamp and informs Harry. When Harry goes back in time, he makes sure to be in her room during the period the timestamp goes off so he can contain the effect. This time however it seemed that he alone would not be enough. Wanda opened the closet door and Harry said, Jean's about to go critical, let's go. Rogue was dressed by then as well and Harry made a portal to Jean's room and waited until the room started shaking. Harry cast a barrier around the room and Wanda and Rogue used chaos magic to strengthen it and to soothe Jean's bad dreams. The psionic energy coming off the girl this time however nearly cracked Harry's shields and pushed Rogue and Wanda back. They increased the strength of their spell and eventually the psionic storm calmed down. Jean shot up and turned to see Harry, Rogue and Wanda. Her face turned painful and she started crying. Wanda went to her left and Rogue to her right and they started comforting her. Jean said through sobs, "I'm sorry. I keep dreaming about that night. Maybe I should have let the professor take my memories." Rogue shook her head and said, "No. You would still feel the fear but you wouldn't know where it was coming from." Rogue had read over a lot of psychology books in Harry's head and was practically a certified shrink at this point. She knew more about people's heads than even Charles did. Jean tried to hold back her weeping breaths and said, "My powers are getting worse. It's like before you got here, Harry. Please. Tell me what's happening to me." Harry nodded and put his arms around all three girls. He then sent something of a psychic invitation into his mind and Jean followed in. She was surprised to find that Rogue and Wanda came in as well. Harry took out a book of his memories. Jean had already gotten to Kamar-Taj and had just finished Harry's encounter with the doctor. "This scene is a few months after where you left off, so I suspect you would have found it in a week or so." Harry threw the book at a wall and it turned into a projection of the images. Harry fast-forwarded to his meeting with Thawne and hit play, allowing Jean to watch everything from start to finish. When the Phoenix showed up to save Harry, Jean felt she could not be more grateful, even though she already knew Harry survived. She also realized that the image Harry sent to her when they first met was this very Phoenix. Then came the conversation and the Phoenix's request. Jean was shocked over the fact that the Phoenix was the one who saved her life when she nearly died following the soul of her best friend that horrible day, so many years ago. She didn't like what Harry was being asked to do, but was mollified that Harry took the time to confirm that the Phoenix's avatar would not be controlled, only given power and the knowledge of where to use it, before he agreed to it. Rather than ending, the scene fast-forwarded once more to the point where Harry learned that Xavier had blocked Forge's memories of danger and Harry had scanned Xavier's mind to find out what was wrong with him. Harry ended the picture there and said, "Xavier sealed some of the weaker, more human parts of his mind so he could make himself into a symbol others could get behind. He is obviously not aware of the humanity he lost when he did so, which was why he could justify what he did to Forge and what he did to you. I suspect he felt he was doing it to protect you from yourself." Jean sat down on the couch in Harry's mind and started thinking. She knew Harry was trying to get her to do something with her own mind, but she didn't think it was unlocking the sealed connection to the entity of life and passion, the source of all psionics in the universe. She couldn't hate Harry for it either. Harry hadn't been straightforward about it, but he didn't exactly go to any great lengths to hide it from her, and she always knew he'd tell her once she asked. Jean asked aloud, "So the reason my head is messed up is because of that seal?" Harry nodded and asked, "Knowing what you know now, can you guess why the seal is messing with you?" Jean considered it and answered, "Because the seal isn't just sealing the connection, it is also sealing what the Phoenix connected to. My passion, my heart, and other parts of my mind." Harry nodded and said, "Not all of it, but enough of it to make it unstable. I figure Xavier sealed his own mind after it had matured so he didn't experience the same problem, but he still thinks if it worked for him it will work for you." Jean now understood what the Phoenix meant when it said her mind could be crippled if not the seal was not removed. She figured she had a year at most before any damage became permanent, which was why Harry had not told her everything on day one, and just allowed her to work it herself. Jean said, "I want to break that seal. Now." Harry nodded but said, "If we're going to do it, we're going to do it right. It's time for you to meet my mystic teacher, the Ancient One. Wanda and Rogue are coming too, by the way." The group left Harry's mind and Harry made a portal to Kamar-Taj after Jean changed from her pajamas to something casual. The sun had yet to set and Harry was able to get a meeting with the Sorcerer Supreme and informed her that a future version of himself had said to use Protocol Supreme. That was a plan Harry and the Ancient One had come up with to assist Jean in breaking the seal instead of letting her finish it herself to prevent as much damage as possible. They figured that enacting Protocol Supreme likely meant that something bad would happen if Jean broke the seal herself, so they would do it together and help her to prevent any damage. Harry arranged the ritual room and informed Wanda and Rogue of their plans and how they could help. Once ready, all four of them entered Jean's head and found the spot Jean suspected Xavier had hidden the seal. The Ancient One said, "Now, Harry and I will reveal the seal, but it would be best if you opened it yourself. Opening it yourself versus another opening it is the difference between opening a door with a key or opening it with a crowbar." Jean nodded and Harry and the Ancient One touched upon the flow of psionic and mental energies within Jean's mind, and slowly the space within her psyche, which appeared to contain nothing, unfolded itself to reveal a wall containing a door held shut but many chains. Jean noticed the effort that Harry and the Ancient One seemed to be putting into keeping the door visible, so Jean focused on it using what Harry had taught her, and one by one, the chains fell down. Harry and the Ancient One seemed to be struggling, which made Jean nervous, but she set those feelings aside and focused more, felling chain after chain. She put everything she had into the last heavy lock, which clicked open, and Harry and the Ancient One seemed to relax. Rogue walked up and asked, "Was Xavier's locks really that hard to open?" The Ancient One caught her breath and said, "It was not the power of Xavier that made the lock strong. He used Jean's own mind and forged parts of it into those locks. Jean's mind, gifted with a connection to the source, is very powerful, and we could not afford to harm the locks and chains, as they too are parts of Jean's mind." Jean felt what the Ancient One was referring to and changed the locks and chains back into the emotions and mental aspects of herself that had been missing from her mind for so long. The moment she did so, however, she collapsed and seemed to be in great pain. "Bring her to me," came an ethereal woman's voice from the other side of the door. Harry picked up Jean and ran inside and down the winding staircase to where a large flame was burning. The flame shifted into a woman and said, "You have done well, we are not too late. An avatar of mine lives off love and passion. However, her heart was forged into a chain and used to bind me, preventing her from truly feeling love. Had this not been corrected in time, then even if I was freed later, she would always have had a hole in her heart, leaving her feeling empty, and she would have used my powers to fill that hole. Nothing good would have come from that." Rogue asked, "How can we help?" The Phoenix answered, "Before the wound in her heart becomes a hole, you must heal it with love. I can feel the love you three bear for my avatar and the connection you have forged. You must use that connection to show Jean your love for her." Harry and the girls nodded and connected their empathy directly to Jean. They knew that Jean had feelings for Harry, but it was light and fragile, so Harry and the girls used a clemency to hide the depths of their own feelings for Jean, to prevent her from feeling awkward around them for loving her more than she loved them. Now, however, they hid nothing and turned up the love to 11. Harry remembered seeing her for the first time, speaking with her at the mansion, showing her his mind and every interaction that followed. He remembered her kindness, her generosity, her care for others, and remembered how all of that made him fall in love with her. He put his feelings for Jean on full display and allowed Jean to feel it completely. Rogue did the same, and Wanda did as well. Jean's pain-filled face seemed to relax. Harry bent over and cupped her face in his hand just as she was opening her eyes, and he leaned forward. Jean instinctively leaned up and their lips met. She felt Harry's love for her and even Rogue's and Wanda's love. Tears were streaming down her cheeks at the feeling of being so overwhelmingly loved by so many amazing people. She could feel her own heart burn with love for them, and the pain she felt earlier faded and turned to warmth. Jean closed her eyes and wrapped her arms around Harry and kissed him deeply. She opened her mouth and Harry's tongue pressed and danced against her own, making her head swim. Rogue and Wanda smirked from the back as they knew Harry had decades of practice making out after all. The flame behind them turned into a spiral and flew into Jean, but she didn't seem to notice. Her body began to glow and embers burned over her form, but did nothing to harm Harry. Rogue walked up to the pair and separated them, saying, "All right, time to breath, people." Jean realized what she had done and blushed awkwardly. Rogue smiled, took Jean into her arms and said, "My turn, sugar," and planted another steaming kiss onto Jean's lips. Rogue's tongue was just as skilled as Harry's, and soon Jean was swimming again and deeply enjoying Rogue's Frenching skills. The sight of the two kissing made Harry really reconsider his wait until they moved out policy. Thankfully, he would not have to wait too long. Although he was 15, he found a few means that would let him own a house when he turned 16, so he'd already planned to move out next summer, and his heart had already settled in making sure nothing got in the way of taking his girls with him. Rogue broke the kiss and looked satisfied at Jean's zoned-out expression before she turned to Wanda and asked, "You want to turn, sugar?" Wanda blushed and said, "Maybe later." The Ancient One gave a small cough and said, "Perhaps now would be a good time to return to our bodies." Jean regained her composure at that and said, Right." The group left Jean's mind and had returned to the ritual chamber. Harry then asked, "Do you girls want to go through the multiplayer conversion now?" Wanda asked, "You've gained enough levels for that?" Harry nodded and said, "I've found enough time in the last 2 months to do so." Jean asked, "Me too?" Harry smiled, and said, "I meant all of you, of course." Rogue shouted, "Yeah. Let's do it. You do know this is going to be horribly painful, right? I won't be able to stop the process once it starts." Jean said, "It will help me get stronger, right? I'm not turning this down." Wanda and Rogue had known about the pain and didn't change their minds, of course. Harry opened up his menus and selected multiplayer. The multiplayer system scanned his surroundings for those who trusted him and found 4 matches. The Ancient One hadn't left yet and seemed to want to observe, and she was on the list. However, next to each name was how many levels it would cost to convert them. Relatively speaking, an adult's level was 10 plus how many years they spent working in a skilled profession. A desk jockey adult even at the age of 50 wasn't likely to be above level 15, but someone who spent a decade doing something they required training and skill to do was likely over level 20, with higher skilled professions giving more levels on average per year. Soldiers had higher levels than teachers, but teachers had higher levels than cab drivers. The Ancient One was likely over level 300, and Harry would lose more levels than he had to convert her, as the ratio was not 1-to-1. Higher levels required higher conversion cost than lower levels. Jean, Rogue, and Wanda were actually all decent levels, about 20 to 25 apiece. Their power came not from their level but their skill, and both would grow over time. Since Harry was well over level 200, it would cost him less than 20 levels to convert all 3 girls, and with effort he'd have that back by January. Harry selected his girls on the menu, and after a round of confirmation screens and a message that he would be reduced to 195, Harry clicked agree and the process started. 3 small streams of black particles slowly floated off from Harry's arms and connected to each girl. It was uncomfortable, but not too bad. Then came the bad part. Harry felt pain similar to dying but closer to burning. Kinda like having your skin being peeled off while you were on fire. The grunts and hisses from the girls confirmed they weren't any better, and Harry could feel their pain. They seemed to be feeling like a corrosive wind was blowing under their skin and through their organs. The entire process lasted about 10 minutes, and when it completed, everyone collapsed. Ping. New players added. New player, Anna Marie. Level 24, age 15. New player, Wanda Maximoff. Level 21, age 15. New player, Jean Grey. Level 25, age 16. Harry recovered the quickest from the pain and looked over the girls' stats. Not surprisingly, Wanda and Jean had high wisdom and intellect. Wanda also had surprisingly low luck. And Mayor, Rogue, had more well-rounded stats and was more physically fit than either of the others. All in all, not surprising. Harry couldn't see their path ranks, but he'd ask them about that later. None of the girls seemed inclined on getting up, so Harry said his goodbyes to the Ancient One and wrapped all of them up in a time turner and went back 5 hours. He took them to his apartment in London and conjured some extra beds and placed his girls under the blankets and tucked them in. If they weren't awake before classes started, he'd tell Xavier enough to get them excused. They had a tough night but pulled through in the end, and the future was waiting for them. Within a field of kaleidoscopic color which marked the astral battlefield Harry's battle meditation took place in, Harry was standing off to the side while he watched Rogue, Wanda, and Jean fight off a group of 12 tiger-sized wolves. It had been a little over a month since the girls were added to the multiplayer function, and every night since they had used battle meditation with Harry. The girls themselves could not initiate battle meditation, so Harry had to do so first, and only then could he invite them into the astral plane to take part. Of course, he had to lower the level of the conjured constructs, so the wolves they were currently facing were about level 50 apiece. Jean was probably the most excited to take part in Harry's battle meditation because she knew how to access the astral plane on her own, though she had no intention of finding and killing beings within to level up. She knew that Harry leveled up in this space and had tried to find it a few times so she could watch him, but Harry told her he was using a concealment formation to prevent Xavier or other telepaths from interrupting him while he fought. Having the Ancient One find him that one time was awkward enough, he wasn't going for a repeat performance. All 3 girls were floating above the pack and raining hell down into the poor wolves. Jean had already figured out how to float using telekinesis, and Rogue was copying her. Wanda had invented her own chaos magic spell that allowed her to float as well, which proved to be a great advantage against opponents incapable of flight. Jean had 3 forms of attack. She could attack the target's mind to stun, then use telekinesis to hold or throw them, or create psionic blades to physically attack them. She could use Phoenix Flame as well, but they wouldn't get experience for defeating enemies with those, so she refrained from using that. While defending, she could create barriers and move debris or enemies into the way of oncoming attacks. Wanda's fighting style was mostly about controlling the enemy and the environment. She didn't have anything to transfigure into allies in this space, but she could transfigure the terrain and apply various status ailments against her opponents. Her hex bolts were no longer unpredictable, and she could directly transfigure weaker targets into whatever she wanted. Rogue's combat style was more unpredictable. At a distance she would use Cyclops' eye beams, Iceman's freeze rays, Pyro's pyrokinesis, or Storm's wind or lightning. When up close she could cover herself in spikes or Colossus's organic steel and use Juggernaut's unstoppable force or Quicksilver's speed. In a pinch she would use Wanda's hex bolts. None of the three were particularly stronger than the other two. At first, Wanda and Rogue were stronger than Jean, but with the auto-correcting properties of the path system combined with her own Phoenix Flames perk which acted as a multiplier in the speed at which the path increased in rank, eventually she found herself nearly matching them most of the time. All three had their weaknesses of course. Rogue's weakness was the duration she could fight. Most mutant powers come with passive physical enhancements which allow the mutant to use them easier, but Rogue didn't get those, so her use of a power was always less efficient than the original's use. For example, she could run at the same speed as Quicksilver, but she would tire herself out long before Pietro reached his limit. When she used multiple powers at the same time she tired out much faster, so when she sparred with Wanda and Jean, they would use everything they had to force her into a corner and make her use multiple powers at the same time, then drag the fight out until she was exhausted. Neither considered it a cheap tactic, as Rogue could use Wolverine's healing and could become invulnerable using either Colossus or Juggernaut's power. Wanda's weakness was her lack of fast, strong, single-target attack moves. Her casting for lesser spells was near instantaneous, but if she wanted to take down someone like Logan or any of the other first-generation X-Men, she would need something stronger which took more time to cast. She had been getting around this by using stalling tactics and learning different strategies while increasing the strength of her Hex Bolt's ability to disrupt other mutant powers. Jean's only real weakness was her lack of experience. In that sense, Wanda and Rogue were perfect practice partners for her, and she was learning something new every day. Harry offered to allow Jean to copy his own understanding of physics into her mind, which would allow her to easily learn it herself using Harry's understanding as a reference. Jean could use telekinesis and astral creation to mimic many other powers, and with a connection to the Phoenix Force, using those powers didn't drain her even when she tried something big. However, maintaining a constant connection to the Phoenix Force would change her intrinsically, so she only maintained brief connections at various times. In addition to facing off against monsters in battle meditation and sparring against one another, Harry himself would sometimes fight against them either individually, in pairs, or against all three. Although the girls were strong enough to whittle away at the pack of level 50 wolves without issue, Harry could still clobber them all no matter what they tried. Harry found that close quarters combat was a general weakness for each of them, so he would stack strength energy from Cyttorak's realm with Immortal Dragon Chi and use his dimensional long sword along with sorcerer-style physical enhancement. In this way he used his warrior, magic, and dragon path all at the same time and proved to be too strong for them. For now anyways. Harry suspected in 2 years or so they'd be able to give him a very good fight. Though he still wouldn't let them beat him. Harry couldn't fight the monsters the girls were against, or else all the energy would automatically go to him, so he had to just stand around the whole time. Instead of wasting it, he would invoke his Immortal Dragon Chi and practice using it to raise his dragon path. Other times he would use astral creation to practice making astral tech. The astral tech of Lockheed's race was fascinating in more ways than one. Apparently Lockheed's race had actual ships they used in the astral plane they could use to fly from one world to the next and would move their physical bodies with their astral selves. Harry's interest in astral tech was due to the fact that he could not use items from his inventory in the astral plane, but he could place astral tech into his inventory once it had been completed, and he could take it out when he returned to the astral plane. That meant he could make weapons and pieces of equipment that he could use in the astral plane. Harry's tech path apparently loved astral tech as well, as it had gone up 2 ranks to 34 since Lockheed's tutoring in the subject had started. That, along with some other breakthroughs of his, allowed Harry to complete several projects he'd been working on. The final wolf died, and the natural energy they were formed of scattered and was absorbed in equal parts by the girls to Harry's satisfaction. Wanda, who had the lowest level before, had reached level 40, and Jean and Rogue were already at level 41. Even though they shared the EXP, they were leveling up faster than Harry did at Hogwarts because they already had path ranks higher than their levels, and Harry was getting them access to monsters at higher levels than the girls. The multiplayer function had 3 main features which benefited the users. The first was the recovery properties of the Obscurus cells. When injured, their natural recovery increased depending on the ratio of Obscurus cells they had in their body, which increased the more they leveled up. When they reached level 50 they could likely survive being stabbed in the heart, and at level 100 they could shrug off such a wound without decreasing their combat effectiveness. Even Rogue couldn't channel Logan all the time after all. The second function was that they could exceed the limits of their body through leveling up thanks to the Obscurus particles propagation. Even if they all trained at a Spartan-style boot camp from hell for a year, they had no chance of even reaching level 35 from level 25, yet Harry suspected they would all reach level 50 in the next 2 months. They could even distribute the stats they gained however they wanted. Wanda, for example, used a lot of her stats to boost her luck, and Rogue and Jean did the same with a goal of getting the luck to 50 each. Harry didn't want to increase his own luck for the simple reason that he might get bored if he was too lucky, but he had no problem with his girls boosting their luck since they would not come back from the dead if they got unlucky. The third and biggest benefit of the multiplayer status was access to the auto-correction of the path system. Their skills naturally increased with use, and skills within the same path also became easier to use even if they didn't practice them thanks to the autocorrect. For the path system, Jean chose to focus on the psionic path and Wanda focused on the magic path. Rogue, however, decided to walk a similar path to Harry's and used the magic, psionic, and warrior paths at the same time to try to stack them together. Most mutant powers fell under one of those three paths anyways. Spike's, Colossus's, and even Wolverine's power fell under warrior. Iceman's, Storm's, and even Scott's power fell under magic. And Pyro's and Domino's powers fell under psionic. There were also powers that fell into multiple categories like Quicksilver's and Juggernaut's, which were both magic and warrior since their power used time or strength energy to enhance their physical combat abilities. The girls loved getting stronger faster, but under Harry's suggestion they had to hold back in the danger room when showing off to others. Rogue and Wanda had been doing so already, and Jean was starting to get used to it, though she didn't like it. Harry mollified her by informing her about Sinister, who knew that she had lost interest in Scott and that was why she was kidnapped. The fact that he could find that out meant he had means of monitoring inside the Institute, and the reason Harry was able to get her so fast was because Harry had hid all the useful information about himself behind covers. Jean didn't like it, but she understood it. The fall semester of Harry's first year at the Institute had ended, and today was Christmas. Forge and Xavier both had very pleasant smiles on their faces as Harry had shown them his gifts for some of the students and teachers in advance, and both were incredibly happy for everyone. Harry had started openly going out with Jean and had confirmed they were boyfriend and girlfriend. This was something Rogue and Wanda suggested as they wanted to make sure the few eyes coveting Jean knew to stand down. Thankfully, since Harry removed Sinister's influence, Scott had only been treating Jean like a sister and he had given up on all other ideas. He knew that Jean was happy, which made him happy. In exchange for this, Harry would often share Rogue's and Wanda's bed at night. Nothing X-rated happened, but they were enjoying the skinship and closeness. Occasionally Jean would sneak in as well and Harry would enlarge the bed. Jean was not exactly a different person after the mental locks were removed and she regained her full ability to feel love, but everyone could see how different she was since she started dating Harry. She was more colorful and vibrant and seemed both softer and stronger at the same time. Thankfully, everyone attributed it to Harry being an awesome boyfriend, which was not entirely inaccurate. Storm and Logan did of course take the two aside and give them the adult lecture about hormones, consent, and love in general. Harry did his best not to point out that the goddess of nature and the feral animal required a soundproof room when they chose to sleep together. Storm herself had taken an instant liking to Laura and Dr. Kinney, often chatting with the latter over coffee in the morning with Domino. Both appreciated some new female friends as they felt being the only mature women in the Institute became droll after some time. They also enjoyed grilling her viciously about how close she was getting to Dr. McCoy. The two geneticists had many things in common after all. When they started opening presents, Harry was given many small knick-knacks, a cool poster of Captain America, some books, and some t-shirts. Near the end of the gift unwrapping, Harry had Xavier bring out gifts for Kurt, Dr. McCoy, Josh, Sarah, and the others who had features which prevented them from going out in public. Kurt was the only one Harry had told about this project beforehand, and when he saw the watch and who else got one, he teleported over to Harry, took the forehead flick without complaint, and hugged him much to everyone's confusion. "Thank you, thank you, thank you. How does it work?" Harry answered, "The instructions were in the box, but you just tap on the glass 3 times to activate it and tap on it 5 times to deactivate it." Kurt put the watch on and tapped the face of the glass 3 times, which caused his appearance to look like static for just an instant before he was suddenly no longer blue. Kurt looked Caucasian, seemed to have 5 fingers, and no tail, though his hair remained its trademark blue. "Ah, my tail is getting pressed against my leg." Kurt looked back to where his tail had been and didn't see it. He tapped the glass 5 times and his image returned to his lovable blue demon form. He then wrapped his tail around his waist and tapped the glass 3 more times and looked normal again. "Ah, much better." Harry got out a large, full-length mirror he already had in the corner and got it out. Kurt didn't bother walking over to it, he just poofed in front of it and started admiring his reflection. "Oh. My hair is still blue. It's perfect." The other kids put their watches on and tapped it 3 times as well. The gold-skinned Josh became Caucasian as well. The bone-like horns on Sarah's face were gone. And Dr. McCoy was suddenly a very bulky man who nearly matched the Juggernaut in profile, though he was not nearly as tall and one would only think he was incredibly fit. McCoy's surprise when he saw his reflection was the strongest. He asked, "How did you know what I looked like before I changed?" Although Dr. McCoy considered Harry a student and colleague, he didn't tell Harry much about his past. Harry had in fact used some of the man's fur and what he knew of removing the X gene combined with a variant polyjuice potion he used on himself. In other words, he made himself a copy of without his mutation and took pictures of himself to be scanned and used for the hardlight construct. Not exactly wanting to lie, Harry answered, "It's a secret, though I'll tell you later if you really want to know." Making that particular batch of polyjuice was gigantic pain, but perhaps Dr. McCoy would learn more about his own mutation if he used it himself. Not just the children gifted the watches, but everyone in the mansion was happy and many had tears running down their faces. They all knew what this really meant for the kids and it took away much of the hidden burden that being a mutant entailed. While everyone was laughing and showing off, Harry walked over to a corner and got out his last present. "No, I didn't forget about you." Forget-Me-Not rolled his eyes and opened the package to find a metallic bracelet and a tablet. Harry said, "Keep that on for the next 4 hours. It will scan your memories and connect to this tablet. The tablet will display events and people you've encountered and you can select them. Any person you select will remember you. Any event you select that you took part in will be remembered by everyone who took part in it. I can make a new tablet if it breaks and there is an extra bracelet if you lose this one, but try not to as this bracelet and the spare are the only ones in existence and I'll never be able to make more. As long as you wear the bracelet, you will not be forgotten." Forget-Me-Not stopped moving about halfway through the explanation. He was in too much shock. Sure, he knew Harry was going to try something, but he didn't expect him to actually succeed. No one succeeded. He wanted to rebuke Harry for getting his hopes up, but the swarm of smiling children Harry had already done the impossible for today held his tongue. He stared at the bracelet for what seemed like hours before he put it on his wrist and felt someone inside his head. He understood that this was whatever was copying his memories. Not really knowing what to do, Forget-Me-Not softly said, "Thank you." Harry patted his shoulder and said, "It's an honor. I look forward to working with you in the future." Harry had to practically use alchemy in order to turn the DVDs into something he could store memories on, but eventually he succeeded. The big breakthrough was actually a paired component of astral tech Harry made that connected the tablet to the bracelet through the astral plane. That meant they didn't need to be close to each other and the astral plane could easily access and transfer mental information like memories. Forget-Me-Not carefully pulled out the tablet and the large instruction booklet it came with and started reading it. Harry knew he wouldn't accept that this was real until later, so he wouldn't bother him for now. Sometime in the afternoon, Harry's own watch started blinking. Harry kept his homemade cell phone in his inventory, so he used his watch like a pager to inform him of incoming calls and messages. Harry pulled out his cell phone and was quickly called by the Goblin Bloodclaw. He was basically Harry's secretary. "Mr. Potter. A voicemail has been left on the company line by one Winston Frost." Harry asked, "As in CEO of Frost International, Winston Frost?" "The same. He has requested a meeting on the 27th at the headquarters of Frost International in Massachusetts at 10 a.m. Harry tried not to laugh but did not succeed, and he could practically hear Bloodclaw's razor-toothed smile through the phone. Both knew the type of man Mr. Frost was known to be and both knew it was unlikely for things to end peacefully. Harry felt the goblins were probably rubbing off on him in the wrong way because he was looking forward to it. Harry said, "Call back and confirm I'll be there." "It shall be done." Harry hung up and smiled. It had been about 6 months since Brilliance Incorporated started selling gemstones. Harry wasn't too sure about the name, but a company that made gemstones and would soon make tech had to have a catchy name, and he didn't want to call it Potter something. He felt with things like Worthington Industries, Stark Industries, and Frost International, putting his name up like that would feel just too weird, and he already had Potter and Gold Bank and Trust. The goblins had pretty much figured out how to get around all the annoying laws that prevented them from earning among the muggles. Each leader among the goblins had a human counterpart, and that human's name was on record as the one who was employed doing whatever it was that particular goblin did. These humans were employed in shell companies that looked like they did things, but in reality they did not. The so-called human board of directors were all squibs or muggleborns who knew about the goblins and also knew they were just proxies. They had signed magical contracts to fulfill the role of proxy and were paid relatively well. Thanks to this, however, it was impossible to steal the secrets of the company. The hiring process for most positions that were just covers included magical means of weeding out the criminals and spies, so no one who wanted to look was able to find anything, as they would always look in the wrong places. As long as you ignored a few breaches of the statute of secrecy and squinted a bit, it was all still just barely considered legal. The company itself had actually garnered great success so far. Nearly indestructible sapphire panes to be used as windows, diamond drill bits and cutters, large rubies for lasers. There was indeed a market for hairy synthetic gemstones that could be crafted to nearly any size and shape, and many groups were starting to take notice. Most companies had things they wanted to make but could not, as the resources to make them were too scarce for the product to sell profitably. Projects that fell under this category that required gemstones were now suddenly profitable as long as they purchased those gemstones from Brilliance Incorporated. Harry informed his girls of Mr. Frost's invitation, and though Jean looked just a little worried, Rogue and Wanda wished him happy hunting. On the morning in question, Harry wore a custom-made acromantula silk business suit with silver cufflinks and his Potter family signet ring. The smile received from his girls at his appearance was a show of how he looked, which was good enough for him. Harry used a portal to head to MIT, a place he had been to before, and got a cab to take him to Frost International's main building, a humble 67-floor tower 30 floors higher than anything else in the nearby 5-square-mile area. Harry figured the man needed lessons on subtly. The guard at the door motioned for Harry to come to him first, as the door wouldn't automatically open for anyone without a badge. Harry said, "Harry Potter, meeting for 10 a.m. The guard didn't look through any schedule or paperwork, he just gave Harry a once-over and directed him through the door behind him. Inside there was another guard who said, "Mr. Potter, please step through here." There was an open-ended box-like path. Harry followed the guard through to the elevator on the other side of the room. He sensed the X-rays that traveled through him and confirmed he only had a wallet, pen, cell phone, keys, and a watch on his person. Some of the keys looked fancy and high-tech, but there were toys Harry made that didn't unlock anything. Nothing Harry secured used actual keys, but not having them would be suspicious. Once he was through, Harry saw the woman at the counter was speaking on a phone, likely notifying others of Harry's arrival. Several others seemed to be coming and going from the entrance, but they used keycards to both enter and exit. There were no doors to be used by guests without going through a guard first. The guard escorting Harry to the elevator seemed to be the most muscular. He seemed to be the type who would never smile, and his silence had an air of intimidation. Harry found the entire setup amusing. Compared to meetings with Harry's actual board of directors, these guys were positively adorable. That board did not have a voting process when there was a difference of opinion. Their arguments were carried out through battle and the shedding of blood. Adult goblins that survived growing up among other goblins had a warrior path rank averaging between 15 and 25, with the strongest ones being above 30. That, combined with their goblin-forged weapons and armor, meant they were very hardy, and goblins themselves were far faster and stronger than their size gave away. Goblins matured slower and reached their prime between the ages of 50 and 75, with the best maintaining their strength when they were over 100. However, although the strongest goblin warrior wielding the finest goblin armaments would likely defeat most wizards, there were far too few goblins who survived the number of battles required to reach such standards, making them weaker than wizards overall and thus forced to abide by their laws. Unsurprisingly, most of the strongest who had in fact reached that standard were on Harry's board of directors, and none of them were meatheads or younger than 60. Harry did have to kill one particularly stubborn goblin during his second board of directors meeting, but that asshole had it coming. He thought that because Harry hadn't killed him up to that point after all the times he tried to cheat him and fail, that Harry was a pushover. The remaining board members and that goblin's replacement knew not to make that mistake again. So compared to that, Harry had to stop himself from laughing at Winston's so-called intimidation tactics. The elevator ride was unsurprisingly all the way to the top, and the security guard motioned for Harry to continue into the following room while he stayed behind. Something that was slightly surprising was that Harry's mental trip wires went off just before Harry entered the room at the end of the hall. Someone was listening to his thoughts and was very discreet about their entry. However, even Xavier couldn't get in without tripping Harry's alarms, because those alarms were made using wizard magic and invisible to even the strongest telepath. Harry smiled at the opening move of his opponent and figured this meant it would not be boring. Harry opened the door and saw Mr. Frost on the other side of a large, apparently hand-carved desk, sitting in a large, leather chair. Behind the man was an open view of the Boston cityscape, and in front of the desk, in what he supposed was reserved for him, was a smaller chair. Winston himself wore a three-piece suit, and the gray hair on his head was slicked back in a way that both appeared professional while giving the aura of experience and wisdom. Fully knowing that his thoughts were being heard by another party, Harry thought that Winston was very stereotypical, and without a dead body in the room or bloodstains on the desk, this entire charade was cute compared to what he was used to dealing with. Harry had already sent a reverse tap to the telepath and confirmed it was a teenage girl in another room, not the man himself. The man looked up from his desk as if he only just realized Harry had walked in and said, "Ah yes, Mr. Potter. Thank you for accepting my request for a meeting." Harry didn't bother sitting in the provided chair, instead he just leaned against it and answered, "Now why would I turn down such an interesting invitation from a man such as yourself? As in, why should I fear you? I obviously don't." Harry could swear he heard a giggle coming from the other room which was quickly stifled, though didn't make anyone aware he had noticed it. Harry continued, "You are also the first person to successfully reach my voicemail. I'm most certain I didn't make that number easy to find, so it would be quite improper of me to decline your request. By law, contact numbers have to be somewhere, but the goblins knew how to hide things within bureaucracy and Harry knew computers. The FBI hadn't found his contact number yet and he knew they were still looking." Winston seemed to attempt a smile, but it was strained. He didn't ask Harry to take a seat as Harry already seemed quite comfortable leaning over the back of the chair and was standing above the seated Winston. The old man said, "Quite. Your company, Brilliance Incorporated, is certainly interesting. There is potential but only if handled well. I called you over to discuss the future of your company." Harry only laughed in his head instead of out loud that the man thought anything he said or did would have any say in the future of his company. Outwardly, Harry said, "Of course it has potential. Nobody has my company's techniques when it comes to producing gemstones. No one can even come close without burning more money than they'll ever make competing with me, so my company's future is, well, brilliant." Harry said that last part with a smile that showed his supernaturally clean teeth. Brilliant was such a fun word to say with a British accent and a smile. Winston didn't bother smiling back, instead he seemed to decide playtime was over and said, "Indeed. It's that potential that has me interested. I called you in here to buy controlling interest in your company. Frost International has a clothing and jewelry line that could use someone with your manufacturing capabilities, and I already have everything here you'll have to sign." Within Harry's head he heard words which sounded mostly similar to his own voice. "It is a good idea. It is dash." Harry interrupted the false thoughts and thought to himself, "No, that's a terrible idea. Gemstone manufacturing is the tip of the iceberg. Selling now before I make my true play isn't an idea worth considering." Harry was immune to telepathic persuasiveness as long as he wasn't dealing with an elder god within their own realm, but he didn't want others to know that, so thought to himself a logical reason to ignore the thought along with some juicy bait to keep the telepath interested. Harry blandly said, "I refuse." Was there anything else? Harry didn't hide his thoughts that this man was already boring him with his cliché gimmicks. He hoped that by thinking such thoughts, he'd draw out the telepath directly. Winston didn't appear to expect a refusal, but added easily, "You should reconsider. Young companies such as yours often face difficulties which cannot be recovered from. Becoming a branch of Frost International would protect you from such things." He didn't even bother trying to hide the various threats within that statement. Harry knew that the goblins had become a bad influence on him when his reflexive response was to give a toothy smile and answer back, "I look forward to the challenge." It was clear they had nothing else to discuss, so Harry turned to leave. The telepath from before seemed to run around the hall, and after reaching the corner where she was in view she started calmly walking as if she hadn't run up to him. The guard didn't block her and she opened the elevator and said, "I'll escort you out. I'm certainly better company than Mr. Orth here." Harry said, "I'd be a nutter not to agree with that. Harry Potter, at your service." She appeared to be a little older than Harry at about 16, though matched him in height, which was impressive as he was quite tall for his age. She was completely lithe in form but showed no weakness in movement, meaning she had a well-conditioned body. That and the whole flawless white skin, golden blonde hair, and perfect blue eyes made it very clear this telepath would not have to rely on her powers to get herself a man, as long as she didn't get greedy, that is. The elevator door closed and she said, "Emma Frost, charmed. I'm impressed with the way you dealt with my father. Most have difficulty looking him in the eye, much least denying him so outright." Harry's internal thoughts about Emma's appearance was simply that she was beautiful, and he wished she had been sitting at that desk instead of the grumpy old man. Sharing the company of a beautiful woman was far more pleasant than staying in a room with an irritable gray-haired old fart. Harry said, "Compared to my own board of directors meetings, that was outright boring. Every member carries at least one weapon, and the better parts of our discussions and negotiations over disagreements don't start until first blood is drawn." Harry thought back to a few of those meetings and the sparks that his own personally crafted knife carved out of his opponent's blade before biting into their flesh. After thinking about it for a moment he paused and turned to see Emma's face comically distorted in utter shock. Harry couldn't help but laugh at that. She didn't see goblins in Harry's memories though, as the contracts he signed prevented him from telling others he worked with goblins, and the secrecy within the magic of those contracts prevented that information from being taken. What she saw would then be appropriately altered to look like old balding men snarling at him while rapidly exchanging blows with exotic blades. Harry unpaused and turned to see she had corrected her face so that he wouldn't see her gaping. She said, "That would certainly put some things in perspective." After a moment of silence she said with worry clear in her voice, "I just hope you are not underestimating my father. He has many ways of bringing down companies that go against him, and I understand that Brilliance Incorporated doesn't have any military contracts yet. In most countries, military contracts were shields of protection. If someone went against a company that was contracted to sell products to the military, the government would likely step in to assist." Harry thought, to himself, that her mention of yet implied she had a way to get him a military contract through her. Harry wondered if she was poaching or if Winston put her up to it as a plan B. However, it didn't matter. Harry said, "I don't need them. Although it was hard to find out that I am the CEO of Brilliance, it is not impossible. What is impossible is finding out what else I am the CEO of. I wonder how silly your father would feel if he knew I am also the owner of Potter and Gold Bank and Trust." I had trouble not laughing in the man's face. P&G Bank and Trust had partial ownership of thousands of businesses and was an unstoppable stream of wealth that spanned most of the UK, much of Europe, and was rapidly expanding in the US. Even if no one purchased a thing from Brilliance Incorporated, he'd never go into the red. Once more Harry thought, to himself, that this would be a fine test. If Emma told her father of this, it would come to nothing for either of them. If she kept that from him, it would be a good sign she might be trustworthy when she takes over the Frost International in the future. Harry didn't look, but he did pause again to see her smile a bit at that. The fact that Harry clearly believed that she would lead the company in the future was something she likely enjoyed hearing. Harry unpaused and Emma said, "In that case I can't imagine you'll have much to worry about. There may be some personal attacks, slander, libel, that sort of thing. But your board of directors doesn't sound like pushovers, so I don't think there will be an issue." Harry said, "Well, I don't want to get their hopes up. They sharpen their blades enough as is without knowing they are being targeted." "I see. I must say, you are far more interesting than most I've met. Would you mind meeting me another day for a longer conversation?" She added a mental suggestion that Harry would like to ask her out on a date. Harry smiled and asked, "Are you asking me for a date?" "I don't mind." She frowned, just barely, that he thought she was asking instead of getting him to ask, but endured it. Harry continued as if he didn't notice, "I know a nice restaurant in New York. Would you be able to make it for, say, the 31st? Harry was clearly implying that he went to Massachusetts for their invitation, so she should come to New York for his own. Emma smiled and asked, "Where and when?" Harry pulled out his wallet, which contained a business card and his pen. He wrote down an address and a time on the card and handed it to Miss Frost. An eyebrow raised at the address, which told Harry she recognized it. The fact that Harry could get a reservation on New Year's Eve, just 4 days from now, showed his capability. She gave a beautiful smile and said, "I'll be there." The elevator reached the ground floor and Harry left for the exit. Once he was further down the street and away from any cameras, he directly operated back to the institute and told his girls of the meeting with the young telepath. Jean asked with a mischievous smile, "So, a date, huh?" Harry said, "Well, she did ask me for a date and I do plan to deliver. First things first though." He turned to Jean and asked, "Would you like to go on a double date with me?" Wanda realized what Harry was up to and started giggling. "Ah, so you'll give her a date. It just won't be you who will be taking Jean, who is also a telepath." "I want pictures." Harry said, "I'll show you the memories." Jean smiled and asked, "So, Scott?" Harry nodded, "Yup. Scott." If you like this content, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you later, bye bye.